Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Jimmy Evans. I'm 33 years old, a software engineer turned founder of a data startup based in Austin, Texas. For the better part of the last 3 years, I've lived inside a war between patience and pressure. But none of that compared to what happened that one Thanksgiving night, the night my father-in-law decided to humiliate me in front of the entire family. It was supposed to be a peaceful gathering. Turkey, wine, the usual polite chatter. My wife, Claire, had spent the morning helping her mom cook. Everyone was there, Claire's siblings, their kids, even my own parents had driven in from Houston. Edward Callahan, Claire's father, was at the head of the table, as usual. He loved attention, especially when he had an audience for his monologues. I had just stepped into the kitchen to refill a bottle of red when I heard him. "He's a failure," Edward said with a chuckle. 3 years of watching him play on computers in their apartment. Claire deserves more than this make-believe tech nonsense. The wine bottle almost slipped out of my hand. He has no health insurance, no retirement plan, no actual business. Just some fantasy about data analytics for small businesses. What does that even mean? I froze. My own mother-in-law chuckled softly, trying to hush him. "Edward, that's not fair." "No, Brenda," he cut in, "someone has to say it. Claire gave up a lot for him. She's the real breadwinner. And you know what he tells me every year? Still building the platform. My God. It's been 3 years." I stepped back into the dining room like nothing happened, pouring wine into his glass with a steady hand. He didn't even flinch. I think he assumed I hadn't heard. But I had. Every single word. Something cold settled in my chest, something final. What Edward didn't know, what no one at the table knew, not even Claire, was that 2 days earlier I had signed a deal with Vertex Data Systems. They were acquiring my company for $12 million, plus a guaranteed 2-year executive contract and stock options that could triple that figure in 5 years. The deal was official. I had made it. But I hadn't told Claire yet. I wanted everything finalized. Now. I had a different reason to stay silent. I wanted Edward to choke on his own arrogance. I met Claire 5 years ago on a city bus, believe it or not. She was finishing her PhD in education. I was a disillusioned corporate drone building back-end systems for a faceless fintech company. We connected instantly. She believed in building a life with meaning, not just paychecks. She believed in me when nobody else did. But her family? Her father came from real estate. He wore confidence like a weapon. His entire life was built on playing it safe. Apartments, strip malls, leasing, stuff that made money without ever needing innovation. To him, the word startup meant unemployed. From the day we got married, he made it his mission to remind me I didn't belong in his world. When Claire and I got home that night, she noticed I was quiet. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." I spent that whole night staring at the ceiling, letting the bitterness sink deeper into my bones. Edward had made a mistake, one that would haunt him. Because now, I had the power to flip the script. He thought he had me all figured out. But the real story was just beginning. Claire noticed the shift in me the next morning. I was still distant, still quiet over coffee. She had no idea what had changed, but she felt it. "Jimmy," she asked, placing her hand gently over mine, "you've been somewhere else since dinner. Is it something my dad said?" I didn't respond immediately. I just stared into my mug, watching the steam fade like the last 3 years of patience dissolving inside me. Finally, I said, "Claire." I heard him. In the kitchen. I was standing 5 feet away when he said I was a failure. That you deserved better. That I've been wasting your life. Her hand tightened on mine, and her face flushed with anger. He said that? Are you serious? I've got a pretty good memory for insults, I said with a weak laugh. She looked horrified, like her entire foundation had just cracked. Jimmy, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I never, he had no right. None. I shook my head. You don't need to apologize for him. But I need to tell you something now, something big. She tilted her head, confused. I didn't say anything earlier because I wanted it to be locked in. Official. But the deal was finalized 2 days before Thanksgiving. I sold Skyforge Analytics to Vertex Data Systems. Her jaw dropped. They're acquiring us for $12 million. I start as their new VP of Small Business Architecture next month. Salary, equity, the whole deal. It's done, Claire. Her hands flew to her mouth. Oh my God, Jimmy, are you serious? $12 million. I nodded, and she burst into tears, tears of joy, shock, relief. You've been carrying all of this alone, she asked, sniffling. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to tell you when it was final. But after what your dad said, I figured I'd let him learn about it from the internet. Like everyone else. She didn't argue. For once, she was angry at him too. Monday morning, 9 a.m. The press release hit Business Wire, TechCrunch, and LinkedIn all at once. Vertex acquires Skyforge Analytics in $12 million deal to expand small business data capabilities. Within an hour, my phone exploded, calls, texts, emails, connection requests. Ex-colleagues, old professors, even investors who had once ghosted me were now asking for meetings. But no word from Edward. Claire's sister called her crying with joy. Her mother left a message gushing about how proud she was. Edward? Not a single text. And that silence? It was everything I needed it to be. I wanted him to stew. To read my name in headlines. To realize the man he called a failure just outplayed him in a game he didn't even know he was in. By Tuesday, he still hadn't reached out. By Wednesday, Claire was pacing. He's probably humiliated, she said. Good, I replied flatly. That night, Edward finally cracked. I was reviewing client data in my home office when my phone buzzed. Edward Callahan, Jimmy, I've been trying to reach you. Can we talk? I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another message. Son, I owe you a conversation. Please. I showed Claire. She sat down, staring at the screen. What are you going to do? I'm going to let him wait, I said. Let him feel what I felt at that table. Friday, 2 p.m. A knock at our door. Claire looked through the peephole, turned to me, and whispered, It's my dad. I took a deep breath. Let him in. Edward walked in like a man approaching a courtroom. Slow. Cautious. Hands folded. He didn't sit until I motioned toward the couch. He looked at me, then at Claire, then back at me. I owe you both an apology. I leaned back. Said nothing. He cleared his throat. Jimmy, I've said things, cruel things. I dismissed your work. I judged you without understanding what you were building. I was wrong. I let the silence hang heavy between us. You said I was a failure, I finally said. In front of my wife. In front of my parents. And you weren't whispering, Edward, you were making a damn announcement. He nodded slowly. You're right. I said that. And I've regretted it every minute since the article went live. I stood up, walked toward the window. Let me ask you this, I said. If the deal hadn't happened, if the article never came out, would you still be here apologizing? Or would I still be the guy playing games in your daughter's apartment? Edward looked down at the floor. I don't know, he admitted. I truly don't. It was the first honest thing I'd ever heard him say. But I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. I'm not looking for your approval, I said. I never was. But I am looking for something else. What's that? Respect. And that comes slow, Edward. You spent 3 years tearing mine down. Let's see how long it takes to rebuild. Edward left that day looking like a man who had just walked out of a courtroom and lost the case of his life. There was no gavel, no jury, but he knew the verdict. Claire sat next to me on the couch afterward, her face tense with emotion. I know he's your father-in-law, I told her, but I need you to know, this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about principle. About reclaiming my place at the table he tried to kick me away from. I get it, she said. It's weird, but for the first time, I actually see how much he's been holding over you. She hesitated. What do you want to do now? I leaned back, folded my arms, and smiled just a little. We're going to his house for Christmas. And we're going to bring the truth with us. The Callahan family Christmas dinner was an event. Every year, Edward hosted it at his giant Spanish-style estate on the outskirts of Austin. There were antique ornaments, $100 bottles of wine, and at least 3 passive-aggressive comments about careers, politics, or lifestyle choices. This year, it was going to be different. Because I wasn't walking in as the maybe one day guy. I was walking in as a man who had closed a multi-million-dollar deal. The second I walked through the door, I felt it. Heads turned. Whispering started. Claire's cousins, the same ones who used to mock my little project, now looked at me like I was a minor celebrity. Edward came out of the kitchen, smiling wide like a man who wanted to pretend the past never happened. Jimmy, he said too loudly. There he is, the man of the hour. Claire and I exchanged a glance. I extended my hand and gave him a firm shake, but I didn't smile back. He started giving a tour of the house to some neighbors who dropped by. This is my son-in-law Jimmy, the one who sold his tech company. 12 million, can you believe it? It was as if the past 3 years of jabs, condescension, and thinly veiled insults had been wiped clean. Except, they hadn't. During dinner, Edward raised a glass. I just want to say, he announced, how proud I am of Jimmy. He's proven that even risky dreams can turn into something extraordinary. I admit, I didn't always understand what you were building, but clearly, you had a vision. The whole room turned to me, waiting for my response. And I gave it to them. Well, I said, calmly setting my glass down, since we're all being honest tonight, it's true. You didn't just misunderstand what I was building. You ridiculed it. You called me a failure in your own house. In front of my wife. In front of my parents. Silence. Claire looked over, her eyes wide but supportive. You said I was wasting my time. That your daughter deserved better. Edward turned red. The air got thick. And the truth is, I continued, if that acquisition hadn't gone public, you wouldn't have said a word to me tonight. You wouldn't be making toasts. You'd be making more excuses. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted uncomfortably. But now that there's a dollar figure attached to my name, I guess I suddenly count as family. Edward opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. You don't get to rewrite the past, Edward. Not without owning it. You taught me that respect, real respect, isn't something given at the end of success. It's something people deserve even when they're still building. The room was dead quiet. Edward slowly lowered his glass. You're right, he said, voice low. I was wrong. I failed you, and Claire, by treating your dreams like jokes. That night, Claire and I left early. We didn't need to stay for dessert. Because the real sweetness was watching Edward shrink into the truth of what he'd done, and what I'd become. The week after Christmas, I got an email that changed everything again, this time, not for me, but for Edward. Subject line. Invitation, local leaders of Austin, entrepreneur spotlight interview. A well-known business podcast wanted to interview me about Skyforge Analytics, the acquisition, and how I bootstrapped everything from a 700 square foot apartment. I almost declined. I wasn't in this for fame. But then I read the final line. We've also confirmed an appearance from Edward Callahan, local real estate investor and advocate for small business finance. My jaw clenched. That man had no involvement in my company. None. But he was already attaching his name to my journey, like my success had grown out of his soil. Claire didn't even blink when I told her. Of course he is, she said. He's going to milk your success any way he can, make it look like he mentored you. I looked at the message again. You want exposure, Edward? You'll get it. But not the way you expect. The day of the interview came fast. It was held at a local tech incubator, with a small live audience and cameras everywhere. The podcast had reached nearly 200,000 subscribers and a reputation for real, unfiltered conversations. I arrived in a tailored navy suit. Clean. Simple. Professional. Edward arrived in his signature navy blazer with gold cufflinks, still trying to play patriarch. The host greeted us warmly. Gentlemen, this is going to be a great story of mentorship and innovation across generations. I smiled politely. Oh, it's definitely a story, I said. We sat down on set. Lights came on. Cameras rolled. The host began with the usual, so Jimmy, tell us how Skyforge started. I was building analytics tools for small businesses from my apartment. My wife supported us. For 3 years, I worked every night to make it viable. Edward jumped in. And I always believed Jimmy had the drive. I raised a hand. Actually, I said, turning to the host, that's not true. You could hear the studio audience shift in their chairs. For 3 years, I was told, by this man sitting next to me, that I was a failure. That I was wasting his daughter's life. That my work was a joke. Edward went stiff. The host blinked. Wait, so. Edward, you weren't supportive? Edward tried to regain control. Well, I may have had concerns. You didn't have concerns, I said calmly. You had contempt. The host, ever the professional, leaned into it. So what changed? The moment a $12 million deal was announced. That's when Edward suddenly became proud. Suddenly, I was a visionary. But where was that pride when I was maxing out credit cards to keep the business afloat? The audience was silent. Then someone clapped once. Then twice. Then the entire room erupted into applause. Edward looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I'm not saying this to be cruel, I said into the mic, I'm saying it because there are people watching this who are being told right now that their dreams are foolish. That they're not good enough. That unless their success is immediate, it's worthless. I turned to the camera. Don't listen to them. Not even if they're family. After the taping, Edward didn't say a word. Not a single one. He walked out of the building with his eyes low and his hands trembling. The next day, the interview went viral. Local tech founder calls out his own father-in-law on live podcast, and viewers are cheering. The YouTube video hit 1 million views in 3 days. Comments poured in. Damn. That man just spoke for every dreamer with unsupportive family. Respect to Jimmy. That wasn't just revenge, it was a lesson. I received messages from founders across the country. But more surprisingly, so did Edward. Only his weren't congratulatory. They were questions. Real estate partners. Friends. Even his country club circle. Is that true? You really tried to undermine his work. Why didn't you support him? His golden reputation, the one he built over decades, was cracking. And it was all because of the truth. A truth I'd waited 3 years to say out loud. It was quiet for a few days after the interview went viral. Then the email came. Subject: Request for help with property management software, from Edward Callahan. I stared at the screen for a long moment. This was the man who once told me my coding was a hobby. Now he was asking for advice about integrating new software across 40 of his rental units. Apparently, his old system had crashed after an update, and his team couldn't sort it out. Claire peeked over my shoulder. Is that? Yep. Are you going to help him? I closed my laptop and smiled. He can wait. 2 days passed. Then he called. I let it ring. He called again. Finally, I picked up on the third try. Not out of grace. Out of calculation. Jimmy, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now. You're not wrong. I need a bit of help. My property management software went sideways. I don't trust the guy I hired to fix it. You mean you don't trust someone younger than 50 to know what they're doing? I asked, my tone dry. He chuckled nervously. I deserve that. There was a beat of silence. Look, he said, I'll pay you for your time. Fairly. I'm not trying to take advantage. I respect your expertise. I let that last word sit in the air for a second longer. It tasted better than I thought it would. We met at a coffee shop near my new office in downtown Austin. He looked tired. Older. A little frayed around the edges, like the threads of confidence he once wore so tightly were starting to come loose. I brought my laptop. He brought a manila folder full of printed emails and support tickets. Still going old school, huh? I teased, tapping the folder. Guilty as charged, he said, trying to smile. I started asking him questions about the platform he used, how he'd configured his database, what his sync intervals were, what framework his backend ran on. He had no idea. And suddenly, I realized something. He wasn't just coming to me because I was successful. He was coming to me because he finally understood that I knew things he didn't. Things he had mocked me for building. The balance had flipped. I was the authority now. I walked him through a temporary fix, rewired some database sync settings, and wrote a clean script to automate his late rent reminders. He watched like a student watches a professor they'd once made fun of in high school. When we were done, he closed his folder and said, I owe you more than money for this. You owe me 3 years of respect, I replied. He nodded, eyes lowered. And I'm working on it. I stood to leave, but paused at the table. You know, I said, there was a time when you told Claire to convince me to get a real job. To grow up. To stop dreaming. I know. And now. I'm helping you keep your business running. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he met my eyes. I don't know how to undo who I used to be, he said quietly. But I'm trying to learn how to be someone better. I didn't answer. I just picked up my laptop, nodded, and walked out. That weekend, I gave a talk at a local startup conference. It wasn't about code. Or profit margins. Or venture capital. It was about vindication. About how the very people who tell you your dreams are worthless will one day come to you for answers they never thought you had. It wasn't just about proving Edward wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right, to everyone who ever doubted, belittled, or dismissed someone else's vision. By February, things had started to normalize, at least on the surface. Edward was still calling every week or so, always careful with his words, always respectful. Claire noticed the change too. He's like a different person around you now, she said one night. He actually listens. Yeah, I muttered, like someone who finally realized the student passed him by. But just as I thought the dust had settled, a strange email landed in my inbox. Subject, past inquiry, investment file, E. Callahan Trust, 1994 to 2002. I almost deleted it. Until I saw the sender, Marcia Polk, an old friend of Claire's mother who used to work in real estate finance. The message read: Hi Jimmy. I watched your interview, brilliant, by the way. You may want to know. Edward wasn't always the king of caution he claims to be. Back in the early 2000s, he lost nearly half his portfolio in a failed tech investment. He swore everyone involved to secrecy. Thought you should know. I froze. What? I read it again. Edward Callahan, the man who mocked me for years for working in tech, who belittled startups as fantasies, had once tried to invest in a tech company himself. And lost? Suddenly, it all made sense. His disdain wasn't just ignorance. It was projection. He hadn't feared that I would fail. He had feared that I would succeed where he couldn't. That night, I pulled Claire aside. Did your dad ever talk about a company called Blue Vantage? Her brow furrowed. I don't think so. Why? I explained the email. Claire was stunned. I can't believe that, she whispered. He always made it sound like he was this master of safety and slow growth. He buried that part of his past, I said. And maybe that's why he hated what I was doing. Because every line of code I wrote reminded him of his own failure. I didn't confront Edward immediately. Instead, I did something better. I invited him to lunch. We met at the same coffee shop where I'd fixed his software issue. He looked more relaxed this time, like he thought we were back to neutral ground. I waited until we ordered, then leaned forward. I got an interesting message last week. He looked up. From someone who remembers you losing a lot of money investing in a tech company back in the early 2000s. Blue Vantage, ring a bell? His face went pale. That's ancient history, he mumbled. You told me tech was unstable. Untrustworthy. That building a company was foolish. But the truth is, you tried to build two. And it didn't work. So instead of owning that, you buried it and lashed out at anyone who reminded you of it. I was trying to protect Claire, he said weakly. No, I snapped. You were trying to protect your ego. You saw in me the risk you couldn't stomach. The chance you never took again. And that terrified you. He slumped in his chair like a balloon losing air. You don't owe me anything, I continued. Not money. Not favors. But you do owe your daughter the truth. Because for 3 years, you didn't just doubt me. You undermined her choice. His mouth opened, but I stopped him. And if you can't be honest about that, then you're not just a failed investor, you're a failed father. That conversation broke something in him. Or maybe, it rebuilt something. Because the next day, Claire got a letter. Handwritten. From her father. Inside were 2 things, a short note, and a check for $50,000. Claire. You stood by him when I wouldn't. This is not a gift, it's repayment. For the time, love, and energy you poured into a man I was too blind to see clearly. You were right. And I was wrong. Dad, asterisk. Claire cried reading it. Not for the money. For the words. The day I felt the chapter truly close wasn't during a headline or a press release. It was 6 months later, in the middle of a lazy Sunday afternoon, when Edward asked if I'd like to co-host a workshop with him, on resilience in business. I thought he was joking. Seriously? I asked, half laughing. You want me to stand next to you while you talk about learning from failure? He didn't flinch. Yes. I want to tell people what I should have learned the first time, and what I only finally learned through you. I sat back. You're really doing the work, huh? He nodded. I'm trying. I lost a lot in 2002. But what I really lost was the courage to try again. And I took that out on you. That moment. That was the real justice. Not the 12 million. Not the job title. Not even the viral interview. It was seeing a man, stubborn, proud, and once cruel, sit across from me and admit he had been small. Afraid. Wrong. Claire and I moved into our new home shortly after. It wasn't a mansion. Just a sunlit craftsman house with space for our future family and an office that wasn't a kitchen table. Edward helped us move. He carried boxes, offered to install the shelves, even laughed at himself when he couldn't figure out how to mount the curtain rods. At one point, he walked into my new home office, sunlight pouring through the windows, 2 computer monitors glowing with code, and said quietly, "This is what a real legacy looks like." He turned to me, and I saw something I never expected in his eyes. Pride. But not the performative kind, the real kind. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The workshop came and went. He spoke first. Talked about the millions he lost with Blue Vantage. How it crippled his trust in anything he couldn't control. Then I spoke. Not about revenge. Not even about my deal. But about believing in yourself when no one else does. About choosing to build anyway. About carving your own path, without permission. We got a standing ovation. That night, as we left the event, Edward pulled me aside. "I spent 3 years thinking you needed to earn my respect," he said. "But you never did. I needed to earn yours." I looked him in the eye. "You're getting there. Now, when people ask me about the biggest moment of my career, they expect I'll say the Vertex acquisition, or the promotion, or the conference keynotes. But it was none of those. It was that Thanksgiving dinner. It was standing in silence, holding a wine bottle, listening to a man strip away my worth in front of people I loved. Because that moment. That was the match that lit everything. And in the end, the man who mocked my fire, had to ask me how to keep his own lights on. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.